Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, welcome to another episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. I am your host, Andrew Langer. Joining me today is an old friend and someone you all know well, or you should. His name is Robert Ehrlich. He is the former governor of the great state of Maryland. He is also now a senior counsel in government advocacy at King and Spalding. Governor, so glad you can join us today. Let's jump right into it. We just had the election in leadership in the House. We had this great debate and discussion over House rules. You're a former member of Congress. Talk about that debate and discussion, your perspective on all of this.
Well, it's good to see you, my friend, first.
Always good. Thank you.
Secondly, I had, more than a dozen phone calls, texts, emails, no surprise to you, from former staff, personal friends. The sky is falling. We look bad. We look weak. We're a joke. We're coming off a less than great result from the midterms, and look at this. Woe is us. And so I spent a lot of my time over those few weeks holding hands, reminding everybody that the great narrative from the legacy press is not necessarily accurate. And so I took I think what is the majority view. I think Speaker Gingrich was spot on with his interviews in this regard. It certainly paralleled my opinions at the time, and certainly my opinions have been strengthened over the past few days. And that opinion, quite frankly, is, look, it's messy, it's democracy, we're Republicans, we're known as free agents. We sort of love that moniker with regard to our party. It makes it much more difficult to act as a team. Same problem we had in '94 coming in as the majority makers. This is why Newt was such an expert over the past few weeks on this. So it's reflective of our party, the members of our party, new members of Congress. And so I thought it was okay. A little bloodletting. I thought it went a little too far. It was a little more out in the open than it needed to be. But all in all, it was healthy. And Andrew, let me tell you this. I believe in my heart that the message was as directed to Leader McConnell than it was to Kevin McCarthy. It was, hey, this is a different party. It's a different time. The establishment is not getting its party back. We're not going back to the old ways. We've been hammered the last couple cycles. It's not just going to be omnibus bills and hanging around for 2 years and throwing spitballs from the bleachers. We're serious. This is different. It's an America First policy. Whether President Trump is the candidate or not, this is the agenda. It's a blue-collar party. It's no longer Wall Street. It's Main Street. And here's the message, guys. Here's the message to the swamp. This is a different time. So I do believe all those messages were sent. They've clearly been received in the House, as you've seen from the last couple of days. Right. So my bottom line was, okay. And the other thing, by the way, is just to remind everybody, as though they need to be reminded, the shelf life for stories these days in the social media era is about 24 hours. So next week, nobody's going to remember what went down in Washington last week. So I thought a lot of the narrative from the legacy press and Republicans look weak and bad and all that was just what they do, and we shouldn't indulge it.
Right. And so I've been saying this, that, folks are not going to remember this in 2024. They're not going to remember it later on in 2023. And I'm with you in that I would have preferred, here's what I come back. Like, I am someone who wants a lot of stuff to be hammered out long before we sort of get to the public face. On the other hand, there is something to be said for having this conversation out in the open, to send a signal to rank and file Republicans and conservatives that this discussion is happening, right? That there are people who are challenging it. So I agree with you. You have to have this discussion in terms of signaling to the folks who are doing the voting that their concerns are being taken care of. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think you're correct. I also think, well, in that respect, the message is a good one with regard to contrast. Speaker Pelosi, the Democratic leadership, they centralize everything in the Speaker's office.
Yes.
The Rules Committee was and the Rules Committee is always controlled by the Speaker, as you know, but one of the promises gained from Speaker McCarthy was more open rules, more debate. Imagine that in the House of Representatives.
Shocker.
More open debate in the House of Representatives, right? So I really love the contrast there. Look, as we said, it was bloody, maybe bloodier than it needed to be. It was messy, maybe messier than it needed to be. But the fact of it was the message was sent to the quote-unquote swamp. The message was sent to Republicans in the Senate and the Senate leader on the Republican side. Hey, this is different. We took that success with regard to the America First agenda seriously. It is a new party. It's a very different party. I know we're going to get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
And, And so we're just not going to go back to the old ways. They didn't work. And most importantly, our base doesn't want that.
And some of it is, we talk about the old ways. What we're really talking about is relatively recent. The concentrated power in the office of the Speaker. I mean, the Speaker obviously always has a certain degree of power, but the level of concentration is fairly recent. This is really a reinstatement. I want to talk to you about how things are done differently now than when you were in the House, and because there had been a different way of doing things in the Pelosi and frankly just before Pelosi era in terms of Republican governorship of the House as well. Talk about the differences there and with you as a young member of Congress and the involvement you could have versus the impact folks could have, junior members of the House in the process under Pelosi.
I came from state legislature. There was regular
That's right.
order. There had to be. There were 90 days, right? So I believed in regular order, and to some extent, we actually got that accomplished in the Newt Gingrich era. We passed a lot of appropriations bills. So the omnibus bills were smaller. Regular order basically is pass all your appropriations bills. Get it done. Do what you're supposed to do, what you get paid for. Not just hang out for 2 years, make statements, again, throw spitballs from the bleachers, and then at the end, when everybody's panicking, throw an omnibus together, and all the bills that have been hanging around for 2 years, just throw them in too. Nobody's going to read it. Nobody's going to know what happens for weeks later, right? So again, the 72-hour promise as well is part of the new rules package. It's all good in my view. So I do think it's a return to, I'm not going to say regular order, but something closer to regular order, something closer, something more detached from chaos, which I think is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, you have to do that. And I want to hinge on this for a second because this is something we've been talking about for more than 10 years. I know in the policy work that I've done, we had advocated for the 72-hour rule back when Republicans retook the House back in 2010. It's a conversation I had with our mutual friend, Congressman Andy Harris, about this thing. And the fact that it happens now, I think, is a good thing. As a congressman, talk about the importance of reading bills. How many of your colleagues were voting blind on things, and how dangerous is that?
And look, let's be honest. No congressman in this era or in recent eras is going to have the time to literally read bills.
Yes.
What we're talking about here is the fact that you and your senior staff, your personal staff, let alone your committee staff, are informed as to what's in the bill, right?
Right.
You're not going to sit literally, you wouldn't have enough time in a day, in a week, in a month to literally read all the bills. So when we talk about reading bills, we're really saying knowing what's in the bills. And the fact of it is when you have these 1,700-page monsters passed in the middle of the night and deals were cut secretly in back rooms, which is still the way it occurs, and you have no idea, nor does your chief of staff, and often does your committee staff know what's in the bill, you got a problem, let alone reporting what went down to your constituents.
And then the damage comes in these massive 4,000-page omnibus bills. Yeah. If something is in there, right, and you're a lawyer, so you know this, the concept of the poison pill, right? And it's a situation which turns, for those who are in the practice of law, it turns the concept on its head because, you read through things with a fine-tooth comb or a fine-tip pen to make sure that there are no poison pills in there. When you have an executive branch that is so powerful, and the executive branch has the power to reinterpret language based upon a couple of different legal doctrines, Chevron and Auer, it becomes truly dangerous.
That may be short-lived, by the way, my friend. That doctrine.
I hope so.
Yeah, we'll see. But listen, again, going back to state legislature, I came from an era of state legislature where we actually drafted our own bills. How about that? How about that? Well, look, I had one part-time staffer as a member of the Maryland legislature. So I go to D.C., and there is no real regular order. There's supposed to be regular order, but there's deal, and we had a single subject rule in our state legislature where you couldn't throw Christmas tree bills together.
Right.
So again, I'm not saying we're perfect, and I'm not saying Republican control of either or both houses is perfect. What I am saying is something closer to regular order is a good thing for the taxpayers and transparency.
And what you're saying is devolved power, divided power, what's the word? Liquidated is not the right word, but power that is not concentrated. That is a better thing. Listen, you and I never have a chance to talk about these things, so I'm going to take a little bit of privilege here and do that. Talk about your career. Sort of talk about what got you interested in politics, and then what made you run for office the first time. I think it's compelling for folks to understand these things.
Well, I was a jock, as you know, and football was my ticket, like a lot of working class kids, and that's why I'm so emotional about football and education and opportunities for kids who may not otherwise have those opportunities to attend school. So I was plucked out of the playing fields in Arbutus, Maryland, given a scholarship to an elite private school, went on to Princeton, same thing, was captain team at Princeton. So I was used to competition, athletics. When you add a very close family environment, my mom, the only child, my dad was a car salesman, my mom, legal secretary, not a lot of money, but a lot of love, and a lot of politics around the dining room table. And that really formed me, and so I took that love of athletics and competition and politics and policy, again to Princeton and then to law school, and then ran for the General Assembly in my 20s, the Maryland General Assembly, and won by 93 votes in my first election. So I remind candidates all the time that every vote really does count. And then obviously on to the Congress and then the governorship of Maryland. So my life story really does explain my passion with regard to kids in dysfunctional schools. It explains my passion for athletics and being able for poor and working class kids to punch their ticket, their non-traditional ticket, to better schools, to better education, to their life in America today through athletics, which is a good thing in my view. So I'm pretty emotional about all this stuff, as you know.
You know, something. Let's talk. I want to talk about education. I want to talk about the Republican Party as a working class party. All of those things. I want to certainly get into the social issues and the family unit issues. But I'm going to pivot a little bit and talk about the war on youth football for a minute with you.
Yeah.
Because we just had this tragic case in the NFL. We had I remember, it's funny, I was in New York in the fall, and CNN had brought on an expert to talk about youth football. And it was very clear this guy had never played youth football. He was adamantly opposed to youth football. There is a war against youth football going on right now, is there not? And talk about why this is a destructive thing.
There's a war against football, and there's really a war against youth football.
Yeah.
I don't understand all of it. I think it's ultimately going to be unsuccessful. As you see, as the culture war unfolds and you see sort of the left winning on various fronts, they haven't made much progress on football, which I think is a good thing.
Yes, absolutely.
In Anne Arundel County, Maryland here, there was a movement a couple years ago to eliminate hitting at 70 pounds, a 7-year-old 70-pound football. My wife led the charge against that. She met with the county executive and convinced the county executive this is a bad idea. They're safe for 70 pounds anyway. The coach, after each play, the coach literally goes around and picks up the kids and sets them in. The coaches are on the field. They're learning how to play football. They're learning how to tackle. They're learning good habits. This is also a sport where you need not just fathers, you need real coaches to teach the kids safe technique. So the bottom line here is I don't fully understand the war. I guess it's the war against masculinity. I don't really understand the mindset, but I do know this, that athletics generally, I don't care what sport you're talking about, is good for kids. It's great for kids, whether you're especially talented as a guitar player, as a shortstop, as a kick returner, as a poet, I don't care what you are, but the ability of kids to achieve some sort of success somewhere, somehow, at an early age really helps form you and inform you. And I think it's a good thing in life.
Do you think some of it is also about the war on meritocracy, the idea of judging people objectively on their own merits?
I think it's a part of it. It's also why it fails. It's also why the war is failing. And the other thing is the product is so good. We were talking about two different things here. We're talking about how young boys especially benefit from maybe getting hit and learning to be tougher and learning to win, and learning to lose, and learning to practice, and learning the discipline and the self-control and all that stuff and all the work that goes into a pretty grimy sport. That's all good. But also, America loves football because the product is so good. It's fun. Look at those two semifinal games in college this year. And there's a lot wrong with the NCAA. There's a lot wrong with college football. But the product isn't one of them.
Yes. Yeah. And listen, I love watching NCAA football. I would say almost more than I like watching professional football.
I like watching high school football and sandlot football even more. Again, and the other thing here is, and we haven't talked about this a whole lot, but as far as the lessons learned, bringing kids together, nobody cares what race you are. Nobody cares where you came from. Nobody cares what you look like. Nobody cares about anything other than, hey, this is my teammate. We're going to win. Sure. We won. Or we lost together. It's competition. It's sort of what's prototypically American, and I don't want to get all squishy here, but it's a good thing.
But but don't get all squishy on, because again, this now gets into really the sort of the fundamentals and the divide in America, and part of what I want to talk about here, which is the view of America as a force for good versus the view of America as a force for evil. And the idea that we can all come together without having someone step in there and artificially divide us, right? Put you into this bucket, whether it's based upon race or whether it's based upon class or what have you. But talk about America as a force for good.
Well, as sort of our intellectual elites practice compromising when it comes to meritocracy, athletics, not just football, but athletics generally, is the ultimate meritocracy. If you're good, you play. If you got more points, you won. It's not complicated, right? And I think that appeals to just about everybody, I would hope. This whole thing about not keeping score and feelings and all that, it's just not life. It's dangerous. Where'd this stuff come from? I know where it came from. College campuses.
Yes. Well, talk about that. Talk about this idea of insulating kids and the dangers that creates in society generally.
Well, I mean, we're not breaking new ground here. You get a kid, you're going to insulate a child, give him a trophy, give her whatever, and say it's okay, it's not that important, we didn't keep score, just do your best, blah, blah, blah. And then they go to a job interview and they're not prepared and they can't handle failure. You got to be able to handle failure. Half of this is about handling failure in life, not just success. We tend to focus on success. You know, the Buffalo Bills lost 4 Super Bowls, right? A lot of successful players. But what do people remember? They lost 4 Super Bowls. It's handling competition. You know, TR had some great comments about competition. Again, in my view, successful human beings are successful competitors. That does not mean you win all the time. It means you compete all the time.
So, Governor, let's talk about the sociological side of these things. So the role of the family unit, and the family units involved in education, the collapse of our educational systems. I know these are things that you are very passionate about.
I am very passionate about it, and I just told you half the reason why. My story.
Well, let's hear the other half. Yeah.
And so I am truly passionate about giving, and not just through the prism of sports, but life. When I see dysfunctional schools, when I see generation after generation of kids literally sentenced to these schools and they don't graduate and they go to the juvenile system and many end up in the adult system and everybody says, oh, we're shocked. How did this happen? And it happens generation after generation. That's our problem. We have failed those kids. And this is not a privilege, as you know. This is a constitutional right. We failed to deliver their constitutional rights. As governors, this was my passion, trying to get failing schools better. But not just failing schools, because the taxpayers and those kids are customers. Yes. And we're failing our customers. And we're failing them with a fundamental right. We're not delivering that fundamental right. So those who protect the status quo, those who say more money, more money, more money, it just doesn't work. I'm for all the above when it comes to getting kids out of bad schools because they're not learning. And as a result, they can't compete. And as a result, they're not going to be successful in American society.
But talk about the issue. Again, we talk about competition and why competition is a good thing in terms of kids' education. It's also a good thing in terms of education itself, right? And the idea of vouchers. Talk about vouchers and talk about that as an issue for conservatives and Republicans. It really shouldn't be a left-right issue.
Well, it shouldn't be a left-right issue. It should be a purple issue.
Yes.
And by the way, I think sometimes on the right we fail to distinguish between teachers and unions.
Yes, of course.
Josh, my youngest son, just graduated from public school in Annapolis, Maryland. You know that.
Yeah.
He was a fine student, fine athlete. Some of the best teachers I've ever seen. This is a major public high school, over 2,000 kids.
Wow.
My kid got a really good education in that environment. So we have to distinguish between teachers' unions, typically empower for themselves, and to empower unions and agendas, and typically on the left agendas, and teachers. Because some of the teachers that I had in public school in Arbutus, Maryland, my wife at Delaney High School outside of Baltimore. I mean, most teachers are there for the right reason. We on the right sometimes get very cynical about teachers' unions, so I think we really need to distinguish between the two. I just believe there's a role for public schools, there's a role for parochial schools, there's a role for private schools.
Yeah. It
should all be about competition. One kid may be better in this school, another kid may be better in that school. But when we're talking about schools that are functioning, it's a different conversation. We need to focus on the fact we're not delivering the constitutional rights to kids in the failing schools. And that's what the debate should be. That's where the focus needs to be. Right, left, I don't care. It needs to be all the above, whatever you're talking about. Sometimes closing a particular school, going public charter, going residential charter. I don't care what it is. If it works and it gets kids to learn the 3 R's. Is it 3 R's or
right.
4? Reading, writing, arithmetic, right?
Yeah.
If it gets kids to understand how important competition is in the classroom and in life and preparation and discipline and all that good stuff, we know. It's all for the good. Stop defending the status quo. So as a matter of politics, we're talking about substance here, but as a matter of politics, I love the fact it's now becoming more of a Republican issue. We talk about my hero, Jack Kemp, and making the Republican Party look like America and all that. And education was so important to him. And he continues to be my hero, by the way, and I think is a great leader was a great leader for my generation in Congress and needs to be remembered more, in my view. But you see the parent power movement developing, and that's about, crazy stuff for the most part. And just, that's not red parents. They're blue parents. They're red parents in Virginia, all over the country. Get back to basics. Teach my kids. Teach my kids. Do your job.
What do you make of this really bizarre, and actually it isn't even so bizarre, but this distressing story out of Fairfax County, Virginia about the magnet school, Thomas Jefferson High School of Science and Technology.
Example A.
Yeah.
It's example A. And look, the accusation is, and it appears to have some truth to it, but we'll see how it plays out, that these kids on the AP, right? On the
actually, it was the National Merit Scholarship.
National Merit. It's a national merit. So we're not going to let the kids know that they did well in national merit because we don't want to let the kids who didn't do so well. We don't want to hurt their feelings.
Yeah.
Who thinks this way? Oh, and by the way, the excuse appears to be, the kids won't know, but we're going to let the colleges know.
Yeah.
But that way, everybody gets a trophy. That is, I mean, that is so. I can't even understand where that comes from. But to the extent it gets out there, to the extent that not just red parents but blue parents react, to the extent it just gets condemned by everybody across the political spectrum, it's a good thing.
It's about right. It's about framing issues as kitchen table issues, right? And being whichever party tackles the kitchen table issues is the party that's going to get those kitchen table voters, isn't it?
And what is more important on that menu at the kitchen table than how my kid's doing in school?
Right.
Right?
Right.
How my kid's doing in the classroom, how my kid's doing extracurricular activities, what my kid's going to do after high school, all this stuff.
And this gets into, again, you had a family structure, as you were growing up.
Very lucky, very fortunate.
One of the major demographic shift, right, is the number of, I'm not even going to say fatherless families, but families that have at least one parent, if not both parents,
right,
as absentee. Right. Talk a little bit about the devastating impact that has on society, on society, the economy, et cetera.
Look at the numbers.
Yeah.
Just look at the numbers. They say it all. And you're right, when I use the term father, just male influence, just parental influence, parents around. Did you do your homework tonight? Did you go to practice? Did you get there on time? I mean, just sitting around the dining room table, the kitchen table. What did you do today in school?
Yeah.
Who's your date for Friday night? I mean, what parents do. And to the extent, I spent a lot of time in juvenile facilities and a lot of time in the adult, doing our criminal justice reform programs as governor of Maryland. And I saw the results. I saw the tangible results of lack of parents in households. And
sure.
And that hasn't changed since I was in Congress, since I was in the state legislature from 50 years ago.
So let's shift gears and talk about the political landscape of today. Where Americans have never been, actually, I'm not even so sure Americans have never been as divided as they are now, but Americans are certainly divided, and there's certainly a tribal element to politics. Looking at 2024, we have the next presidential cycle. Obviously, there's going to be I won't say necessarily crowded. I don't think it'll be as crowded as it was in 2016, but there's going to be a lot of folks running on the Republican side. How does somebody break out of that pack, and what does a crowded primary do to Republicans' chances in 2024?
A too crowded primary doesn't help, as you know.
Yeah.
I think a lot of Republicans are smarting as a result of expectations that were not met in the midterms.
Yeah.
I didn't make this up, but I think it's very accurate. Put issues aside. Just put all the issues aside, because for the most part, a lot of failure was not punished at the midterms, and that's disappointing. Yeah. But the fact of it is, Democrats are better at elections. Republicans are really good at campaigns. Democrats are better at elections. We saw in the last presidential cycle President Trump drawing 30, 40, 50,000 people at these major rallies. And we saw 100 people in the backyard with then candidate Biden, Vice President Biden. And the natural takeaway was, hey, we got it. It's in the bag.
Right.
Nobody was paying attention to the fact that there were hundreds of Democratic staffers in cubby holes somewhere working on ballot harvesting and working on getting out the vote and doing their thing, taking advantage of mail-in voting, for example. So, again, I think this distinction that observers have made is accurate. We're very good at campaigns. We're not very good. My wife, here's a great example that you'll love. We had a county executive race here in Anne Arundel County. I won my first race by 93 votes, as I just said. I grew up in the era where you cover the polls, you get your signs out, you get your people out, you meet the voters. So Kendall went out, and our candidate here locally for county executive wanted to work the polls, and she comes back after 6-8 hours and said, I hardly met anybody because people had already voted. They had mailed in their vote. It doesn't work the way it used to. The old rules don't apply. We better get it. It's one thing to be right on the issues. It's one thing to be on the right side of the culture war. It's one thing to understand how all the spending is hurting us. It's one thing to advocate for sovereignty and a border and against cashless bail and all sort of the really hurtful stuff from the progressive left these days. All that's well and good. But if you can't win an election, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I have a good friend who says electoral politics is all about victory. Otherwise, it's just civics, and I think that is a
well.
that's
Sometimes we tell ourselves how great we are because our candidate won the debate, and I mean, look what's happening just take the border for example.
Yeah.
The fentanyl, the sex trafficking, the empowerment of the gangs. There's literally no defense to what's occurred there in the last years. Nothing, and no one's talking about this, by the way. Displacement of semi-skilled American workers by unskilled, cheap labor.
Right.
Nobody even talks about that, right? And you think the Democrats might actually want to talk about that, but they don't. So there's literally nothing good that comes of this, just human misery. The migrants aren't treated very well. It's all just a bad deal. And nobody really cared enough at the midterms. It didn't really switch a whole lot of votes. So something's wrong here. Something's wrong here, either with our message or the way we message. I think the substance of our position is correct. But clearly the way we message and the way we conduct elections is not going well.
No, it's funny because when the speaker's race was going on, all I really wanted out of a speaker was someone who can articulate what it is that the Republicans are doing, someone who has the gravitas. When I talked about Speaker Gingrich and his ability to sort of tell the story out there, do you think part of it, Governor, is that we don't have a lot of good storytellers on our side, or is it the legacy press not letting those stories get told?
It's not the legacy press because Reagan had the legacy press.
Yeah,
we've always had the legacy press against us, so that's not it.
Yeah,
the legacy media, the new media, the media, with certain exceptions, is to the left. They've always been to the left. They've always done their thing. They'll always do their thing. I always tell candidates, stop complaining about it. It's not changing. I do think part of this is the social media era.
Yeah,
it's changed politics. I think it's part of the answer to your question. But again, a Gingrich can emerge. Now, whether a Churchill could emerge in this era, they'd be saying, oh, he drinks too much, blah, blah, blah. And he sleeps too much, and he stays up too late, and he sleeps in and all that. I'm not sure, but I do think that messengers count.
Yes.
The message is the most important part of it, this equation, but messengers count. So to the extent, Kevin's had a pretty good couple days here, coming out of the gate, very strong. And the attention's all in the House Republicans, so take advantage of it. And look, you and I both know there's not going to be a whole lot of legislation passed in this Congress. You have a divided Congress. Much of the legislation, many of the oversight committee hearings, many of the investigations are going to be about 24. And setting the stage and articulating the agenda and telling the voters what we stand for. And I think that's all for the good.
No, it has to be. Well, I mean, if you were advising, and I know you are advising folks up on the Hill right now, what would you say is the most important? As you said, they're not going to get legislation signed by the president. It's possible, but highly, highly unlikely. What's the number one thing that they could be doing to win converts and to hold on to the base right now?
I think outwardly be as transparent as they've been the first few days here. Continue to articulate this pseudo-populist, I don't call it a populist, because we know what populism really was in American history. This is really not a populist movement. It's an America First, populist-influenced movement. That agenda that worked so well for 4 years, continue to pound on it, but quietly in Washington, D.C., in the offices that really count when it comes to elections and how dollars are spent and all that, figure out why we're so ineffective in election season. It's no longer election day, it's election season. If ballot harvesting is the law in your state, do it. I don't like it. We both have issues. I know we both have issues with
Absolutely.
it. Most Republicans have issues with it. Most Republicans have issues with mail-in voting, election season rather than election day. We have problems with all this. Get over it. Just get over it. And understand. You see this playing out now in the race for the RNC chair. And I think that's a good conversation to have. It's a really important and very relevant conversation to have as well.
So you're not just a senior counsel at King Spalding, but you are also an author. Do you have a new book coming out soon?
Well, I'm still doing events with regard to my last book, which was not just about President Trump, but it was about that era.
Yeah.
And it was about really what a disruptor meant in the context of that era.
Sure.
And people tend to focus on the Trump personality, but my book focuses on the substance of the disruption.
Good.
The disruption with regard to the foreign policy establishment and the business establishment and the judicial establishment and the Republican establishment and the Democrat establishment, and why all the elements, the constituent elements of power in Washington were so threatened by this guy. Yeah. By the uninvited guest, by the guy who said, I may be a Queens developer, but I'm going to represent the interests of that guy, that family, that woman making $25,000, $30,000, $35,000 a year with dirt under their fingernails, still punching a clock at work. And some of these trade deals haven't worked out very well, and a lot of the immigration policies haven't worked out very well. Allowing the Chinese to steal our secrets hasn't worked out very well. And we're going to revisit all of your assumptions, establishment, bipartisan establishment. We're going to expose those assumptions to the American public, and we're going to try to do better. And so that's what my book is about, and I'm really proud of that book, because I think it's not sycophantic with regard to the president, but it does describe what a disruptor really meant at that time in that context in Washington, D.C.
Listen, substance matters in the end, right? Again, we talk about the fact that victories in elections are important. Otherwise, it's just civics. Elections matter because elections change the substance of what's going on policy-wise. Listen, I know you guys, normally I ask guests about their outside interests. You and Kendall, you are about to be, if you're not already empty nesters, you're about to be empty nesters. What does that look like for you guys moving forward in terms of those outside interests?
Well, empty nesters with a caveat. We went to every game Drew played this year at Washington and Jefferson. He had a terrific year. And now Josh just transferred into Susquehanna, a really good D3 football program. He'll be playing quarterback there for the next 4 years. And
wow!
So every weekend we'll be going to college football games. And we're also doing our podcast, Bottom Line with Bob and Kendall Ehrlich. And I have a very active website, as you know, and I still write for Western Journal and do speeches for Republican candidates. And we're still doing a lot of politics, and we'll probably be very active with regard to 2024 as well.
Well, I stand by it. I wish one of you would run for Senate back a coutle of years ago in Maryland.
As you know, and maybe a lot of folks don't, Kendall was deputy drug czar for President Trump. So she is a real expert when it comes to the border and the fentanyl and the gangs and what this epidemic is doing to young people in America today.
We got to get Kendall on both the radio and on the podcast as well. Governor, listen, thank you so very much for joining us today.
My pleasure, my friend. Great to see you. Godspeed.
Thanks. Our guest has been Governor Robert Ehrlich, the former governor of the great state of Maryland, also a former member of Congress and a member of the Maryland legislature. I am Andrew Langer, your host here on the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. Enjoy the rest of your lunch.
This has been the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast, hosted by Andrew Langer. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream